absolutely. Yes, well, I was born in Canada and I now live in Australia. And my journey with the work that I do, well, stems from my own interest in understanding humanity and to improve society in which we live and improve relationships and connection with ourselves and the world. And now living in Australia, I studied here kinesiology. It's a method where we use, it's very similar to what a psychologist would offer, excluding the research and statistics, and it's more body work. So the work that I'm doing, yes, is a psychosomatic work where we're working on the psyche, however, allowing the body to release what is held in the muscular, in the tissues of the body, because this idea that our past traumas and abuse or things that we've experienced in our life can hold the memory in our down to the cellular level of our DNA. And so I'm very passionate about the somatic body work, but also the integration of the mind and body. So working with it's also an energy model. So it can be also working on the body, but also energy, the mental, emotional, and even the spiritual realms of our dimension of being a human and having this human experience. So we're not just this physical body, but there's different layers to us. So it's addressing all of that from a holistic level. So it's covering the energy psychology of things. These styles are, in the most simplest form, we could use these categories. But it's interesting because in our environment in which we live, knowing these styles can be very helpful in learning about ourselves and how we relate in the world. And it's interesting that I would almost avoid categorizing ourselves into these boxes. However, though, see it as an idea to help us look at where we might fall on this spectrum. And so this idea is there's 4 styles, and the first one is secure attachment, which in the simplest form is that we trust and feel safe within ourselves, but then also with others. The anxious attachment style is where we don't feel safe within ourselves, we feel safe with others. So it's this leaning in, looking outside of ourselves, and I will go into more depth with that. The avoidant style is where we feel safe within ourselves, but not with others. So this is sort of this moving back and retracting. So I can go deeper into describing those later. And then the fourth one, and these are just, there's different varied names, but it can be looked at as disorganized, but in the simplest form is that it's where we don't feel safe within ourselves, and we also don't feel safe with others. So it becomes this sort of psychological reversal or conflict. And I go like this because as a child, we're like, do I move in? Do I lean back? Where do I go? And I'm not safe. And that's what it comes down to. And so when we look at these attachment styles, they really derive from how, as a child, the first 7 years of our lifetime, these formative, really critical times in our life where we're learning how we are loved and how we can love in our environment. And so if you were to look at a child, they first come to life and they're observing, they're witnessing, they're testing themselves, they're learning, am I lovable? And where do I receive my love? And so as a child in our environment, a survival mechanism, the instinct is to connect, is to reach out and test our boundaries. And so with these different styles, they can develop and cause us to have these behaviors as an adult. With secure attachment, it can look as perhaps maybe very healthy parents, or it could be also the primary caregivers. Perhaps they're giving the child attention and care and nurture and love. And so the child, in their experience, in that contact, in that dynamic, they learn that, oh, I am safe. I can trust myself in exploring the world through play, but I can also trust my primary caregivers, so I feel safe in my environment to explore more and expand beyond these boundaries. And so in a safe, secure attachment style is usually where the primary caregivers were able to give that attention, love, and care and nurture. Yeah, the main thing is that the child may seek out emotional support or connection, and when that is, let's say, not met, then they learn that their emotional capacity or that their emotional realm for their safety is not met. So they learn that they cannot receive or have that met at all, and so then they rely on themselves. They become very independent. They become on themselves, and they tend to learn that it's not safe to have emotional intimacy with another. Then when it comes to anxious attachment, what can happen with this one as a child is they are witnessing and experiencing their primary caregivers as not being available, detached, and distant. And so in that way, what happens is the child is leaning in, seeking, and okay, if in order for me to be loved and in order for me to get my needs met, I need to kind of chase them or go after them. Other things that can happen is we can become hyper vigilant and attuned to our environment to find out how we can be safe and trust. Disorganized, fearful, this is where the primary caregivers could be abusive, or the child may experience extreme traumatic observations in their environment where they then don't trust themselves and they don't trust their environment or who's in their environment because of the abuse and traumatic experiences that they're experiencing. So more often this is, I would say, on the spectrum, the worst case, because they don't trust themselves, so that security that they have within themselves is lacking, but also they're fearful and hypervigilant of their environment. So this is not the optimal, favorable way of living in life, because this, as you can see, could cause a lot of complex issues. There is a series of questions that can be asked that can help you narrow in where you might fall on the spectrum. And that's the thing, is that there is no black and white, but it does give you a sense of a guide on a trajectory or a spectrum of where you might fall. So there's questions that you could ask, like, for example, in a relationship, when, say in a romantic relationship, if, say, someone says, oh, I need some space, you could then ask, how do you feel about that? Do you feel threatened by that? Do you feel okay with that? So, for example, someone with anxious style, they might feel that as a threat because they're wondering, oh, why do they need space? Oh my goodness, because their greatest fear is abandonment. And in that case, sometimes, not always, and so they might be able to, that's one example, look at that as, well, that fear that's stirring and coming up and arising, they might not be consciously aware of that fear of abandonment, but if they are noticing that they're not functional in that relationship because they're feeling that they need then assurance, more connection, to, you know, conversations around why you need that space. And, you know, that's one area, one thing you could look at to find out if you can recognize these areas of dysfunction, let's say. And so for someone who might be an avoidant, if someone is too clingy and wants their connection, which is kind of like the anxious style, if say you did fall into that spectrum of the avoidant style, you might find that closeness, that intimacy, you might want to back away and be like, oh, and that's where you might need that space. And in this way, then you might say, oh, I might fall on the avoidance style because that intimacy is too much. So it's these, you know, there's a series of other questions that can be asked to really kind of pinpoint, but that's an example. And one of the most sort of common relationships that can play out is this anxious avoidant. And in the avoidant style, again, like I was describing, is where there's this desire to get close, but then if that intimacy is too close, I'd have a fear of the emotional intimacy not being met, but they want to get that intimacy and involvement. But if it's too much for them, that love that is being surrounded by them, that intimacy, that closeness can be too much for them, that they will retract and go back. And then the anxious attachment category of someone will be then doing the thing of calling and texting and reaching out. And so it's this dynamic of this polarity of of back and forth, of sort of chasing and retracting. Well, this is an interesting question because, you know, there is this idea of that, oh, if we have some healing that we need to do within ourselves, that we're going to attract this opposing style. And so, yes, that can be true. And yes, however, we also have a responsibility to allow it, or take responsibility to allow and accept that. So whether or not you're conscious aware of it, you can allow and accept that relationship, and then it will play out. And there is some beautiful, like when we look at these dynamics, they're not always bad, because what they can do on a level is that if there is a conflict or noticeable discomfort, we can see that as a way to look at, what is this person, so let's say it's a romantic relationship, what is this teaching me about myself? What is it in them that I'm projecting, perhaps, that I need to resolve or integrate within myself? Now, yes, we can attract that, and I think perhaps maybe we do, because then in a way we can look at how those qualities or characteristics are projections, let's say, that we can resolve within ourselves and heal within ourselves and find within ourselves, instead of externally looking for this in others. But I would say that I would say that's a yes, but I often wonder as well that perhaps, you know, there is a choice that we have. And so perhaps maybe are we conscious enough to flag it and say, okay, are we going to allow this, and make a conscious choice to allow it, to say, you know what, let's have this conscious relationship. Maybe you're playing out anxious, maybe I'm playing out avoidant, and let's play and have this dance and see where we can heal together. Now that would be the optimal, best way of working through.
So you can have a healthy relationship as long as you both know where you are, and try and grow together and heal your own wounds.
Absolutely, yes. Now, whether or not we attract it, that's an interesting idea, because then that could come into the idea of energy, if we're all energy. Now, that's a different model, and that's a model that I work with. So this polarity, this feminine, masculine polarity, because in a way, the avoidant is sort of being, the avoidant style and the anxious style has feminine and masculine qualities, which, you can ask about that as well. And the feminine masculine qualities within us are, areas of, are we taking action? Are we too feminine? Are we too masculine? And I don't mean that in a sex or gender, but perhaps more of a, yes, being magnetic, say, taking action and taking responsibility and building structure within ourselves and our relationships. The boundaries. So there's so many different cross pollinations of different theories. It's about safety and trust, isn't it? In our, yeah. And so going back to those styles, the questions are, do I feel safe within myself? Do I trust myself? Do I trust others? And do I feel safe with others? And so as we grow up, we can build these different relationships and have these different relationships. And ultimately, if we do have consistent, healthy relationships, we can resolve these dynamics and better build security within ourselves. Now, not always, if we have had abusive, traumatic childhoods, does it mean that we're going to have these tendencies to be in these typical categories. However, though, again, it's just a guide. But let's say that if we have had traumatic or abusive relationships, there quite possibly could be a tendency to be in these unhealthy relationships, because when it comes down to it, our nervous system has learned these safe coping mechanisms, and these coping mechanisms might actually not be functional behaviors. So then, that's where
feel safe in the unsafe.
Yes. And so it may feel safe to be around someone who has an addiction, because we may have learned that, okay, if I can rescue this person and be responsible for them and not be responsible for my life, then this is how I can be safe. And so we then, might be attracted to these relationships of addiction, because that makes us feel, safe and good, that we can be responsible for somebody else. But in the end, we know we want to be responsible for ourselves. And then again, there's layers to this, because now we're avoiding being responsible for ourselves, but rather being responsible for someone else in their addiction. And then that addiction is just enabling that dynamic to play out. So this is one example of how we can carry on these patterns, if you will, that we've learned in our system, in our nervous system, that carry out into our adulthood. And this is why I love body work, because that's where I feel is the real point of getting to the target issue of the root cause and getting down to the cellular level to release that in the body, so we can shift our awareness, and then through being witnessed, being acknowledged about that inner child who's gone through these several things. And this also ties into codependency, and what we want to move into is interdependence, which is that healthier receiving support from our relationships, but we're really supporting ourselves in the end. These theories, I think, will help most certainly. Now, there is a possibility that if we keep in these relationships that are detrimental, or this possibility that those patterns may be more reinforced and are just stagnating and prolonging the healing. There is that possibility. However, I recognize that I think that as any human being, though, if there is this consistent issue and dysfunction in our life, there's going to come to a point where we're going to say, okay, something is wrong here. I need to address this. And I think that there's going to be people will start to notice that they need to take steps and they'll then hopefully get the help that they need and the support they need. Now, the reason, and it's interesting that you asked that question, because I was about to share that psychosomatic work, working with the psyche, working with the body, is a way to really pinpoint down to the root cause of the issue, because the method that I use is called muscle testing, and it's muscle monitoring. And so what this is, the idea is that the body holds the truth. It doesn't lie. And so if you were to have a goal to say, I choose to be in healthy relationships, then unconsciously, subconsciously, through the muscle testing, the body is going to detect through my muscle testing, it's going to say, okay, if you want this goal, then we're going to have to break away all of these layers to access that goal and to reduce the stress on the body, to raise your life force energy to get to that. So the way I work is I will be able to target the unconscious, subconscious beliefs. So it could be simply, I am not loved, I am loved. That would be a conflict. A psychological reversal is that place where we go back and forth, or it's completely reversed, that where it could be, I am not loved and I am loved. And so then of course, if that's the belief, then we will have that play out in our external environment, which is not functional. So if we can access these subconscious beliefs and clear that from the system through energetics, but then also somatic touch, in whatever form the body, and when I say because when I'm working with the body, I'm listening for the muscle testing to find out through my protocols and my databases what is the most appropriate method to apply in that session to release these tension buildups in the body, to then access the healing that's there. And how it can get quite complex in describing how I work, but in its basic form is to release those conflict and psychological reversals in the unconscious, subconscious mind, and access where it's held in the body. So so when an adult is being faced with a new circumstance or relationship, they can now cope better and respond. So that's the key word, is being responsible, responding appropriately, healthy, in a functional way, versus going back to that pattern that was dysfunctional, that once kept them safe, but actually no longer is safe now as an adult. I will find the order that is needed based on what the body's muscle testing shows up in a particular order of sequence. So it could be neurolinguistic programming, which is, using the eyes, using affirmations, releasing certain points that are on the body to release those surges. And then once the release has happened, then we're going to imprint new data into the brain. So we can then use temporal tapping in the brain to imprint new information. But the important thing is, not only is there a release and then adding new information, but then the person also needs to take responsibility to take action. But they will find that in presenting with that new experience, with that relationship or that new environment as an adult, they will notice that surge is less dictating and controlling their life. Now they'll notice, oh, I feel less stress in this. I feel like I now can choose my response. So that's where the work that I do is I help them release, integrate new information, and then, but they still need to take the action. But I leave them through the muscle testing to find out what else they need, what actions they can take to help move them forward. So it's almost like they have me as that session, but now they're taking self-action, self-responsibility to move forward on their own. So they don't become reliant and dependent on me as a practitioner. There's so many different techniques that are used, and that's what's beautiful about this modality, is that there's it's unlimited, but it will narrow in exactly what that person will need at that given time.
Yeah, as to where the stress is held in their body.
Correct. And the idea is then for them to be able to cope with their life much better. And, you know, it might be a huge, I might touch their arm, and then suddenly that muscular or that area of the tissue might have, you know, maybe someone touched their arm as a parent and they had a traumatic experience. Say that might relieve, that touch might suddenly impose an emotional release. I now witness them, they acknowledge the emotion, fear, terror, whatever it is. They release that, they get the acknowledgement, they get that love that they needed as a child. And we can also regress to certain ages, even in certain trimesters, even at conception, and then beyond that goes into the more esoteric. But when we do that, that allows the body somatically, because the body's holding the memory, it's saying, okay, now I can let that go now and move on. And so it's such a beautiful way for with the let's say the clients or the patients understanding of so they'll gain awareness, they'll gain a understanding of who they are and discovery of what they've been through and why they've been acting the way they've been behaving. But then also to have that compassion and love for themselves for what they've been through. So there's all these different layers that will occur to bring someone to a state of, okay, I've got an action plan. I feel excited now about my life. I feel excited about a new way of living and moving through the world. And suddenly they might even notice, or even they may not even notice, because it can be quite unconscious or conscious. But when things become more conscious, that's where the shifts also occur as well. If you didn't have the support around you, the best approach would be now it can be challenging, because in the world where we are living quite we have busy lives, we have lots of things going on, but ultimately if you can take time to yourself in that moment when you start to feel that sensation that's uncomfortable, that's triggering, that's where you have to say, excuse me everyone, I need a moment to myself. Or, when you recognize that within you and you shut everything off and you go to a safe place and you feel comfortable and you feel it, you drink water and you let it, you move through it. The only way through it is through it. And so it's uncomfortable and unpleasant, but you acknowledge what you're feeling, try to identify it by tuning in, listening to your body, loving your body, and crying or letting it go in the release that it is and feeling it. And then it could be moving the body. So it could be going outside for a run, moving the limbs, especially in the sun, drinking water, letting it go, shaking it out, moving it through you. And that would be but it's the key is feeling it. This is it. It's feeling.
And that's what makes it so interesting, so inspiring. So thank you for that.
It's been a pleasure to share what I love and what I'm passionate about with you, Tracy and Carl. Thank you for having me on Aligned Within channel.